Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Waker Unflooded. I am Alex Lathem, and joining me today is Johnny Depp. Say hello. I'm sorry, Joey. That's what you look like. But please introduce yourself, Joe. This is your channel.
I am Joe Kendrick. Welcome everyone to Wind Waker Unflooded. This is Podcast Unflooded. I'm joined by special guest Alex Latham, my co-host as always. Today, we're starting the episode as always with viewer submitted questions. We have one this wonderful morning from Callum's Army, contributor to the project and super fan of the channel. Callum asks, very respectfully, are you open to feedback regarding not the locations themselves, but where they should be placed on the map? Now, Callum, you've asked me these questions, and I know what you're talking about. You're asking about Snow Peak Mansion. You're asking about Snow Peak Ruins. Why isn't the mountain in the northwest? And I don't know what to do. Ice Ring Isles in the south. It makes perfect sense. I guess I might have to add more snowy mountains. Right now, I've been a fool and I put the Snow Peak Mansion on Ice Ring Isle because it made sense to me. I don't want to just force in a new snowy mountain. It's a mansion like Snow Peak Mansion. It doesn't have to be the same location. But I guess all this to say, I know what you're talking about. I'm always open to feedback. That's my answer. I'm always open to feedback. That doesn't mean I take it, but I'm always open to it. So do feel free to comment down below any of your criticisms and positive or negative feedback. I want to hear it whether I listen or not.
Yeah, I guess what Joe is really trying to say is he hates feedback and he hates his fans. I mean, what else is new? They don't call him the greedy. I don't even have a clever nickname. But no, yeah, I think you and I have talked about feedback a lot, and I think you've always been very appreciative of it. It's just kind of sometimes you're just like, yeah, I appreciate the feedback, but I just disagree, right?
That's how it goes.
And that's just how it goes, yeah. And I really have enjoyed people leaving feedback. I mean, I guess, like, I don't know. I've talked about it before, but I feel sort of attached to this channel, even though all I do is, like, I show up on Joe's podcast. But
It's a very important role.
I am integral. You're so right, Joe. And thank you. I mean, he said it, not me. But yeah, we really appreciate it once again. And so, yeah, I mean, as always, like, leave a comment down below if you have any thoughts, and we could tackle them in the next episode. For sure. Excuse me.
Yeah, ask us more questions. Ask us more questions, and we'll tackle them in our viewer submitted questions segment for our next episode. But yeah, I mean, there's some things we want to talk about in this episode. Me and Alex were talking the other day. There's a lot of things that the Zelda series shares in common with. I guess like Link is a superhero of sorts, right? He has all these gadgets. He gets stronger. It's a game about growing in power, tackling on enemies, and we kind of just wanted to compare the superhero genre of games. I think it is kind of an offshoot of the Zelda formula. A lot of them share a lot in common. Not all of them do. There's some key differences, but there's a lot of different games that involve puzzle solving and combat, and these are key pillars of the Zelda franchise as well. And just kind of talking about different games and how they've approached this formula of being a hero. Because I mean, Zelda is a game as well about hero stories, and so are superhero games.
Mm-hmm. It's so true, yeah. And Joe, you've been playing a superhero game, dare I say, 3 even superhero games. Joe, you've been playing the Arkham trilogy, isn't that right?
Yeah, I just got that recently. I know it came out a couple months ago, but I just picked it up. And yeah, I'd love to kind of just unpack the Arkham games and what they do. I talk about the game design here. I mean, obviously, like, we're not talking. We may not be talking as much about Zelda in this episode, but there's so much that if you're interested in Zelda and mechanics, the mechanics of Zelda and the design of Zelda, you want to talk about puzzles and combat, especially those key pillars. Those are there in the Arkham series, and they're handled differently, but there's still a similar, like, growing in strength, getting more items, and I think that it still may interest you if you're interested in talking about game design.
No, for sure. I mean, I think it's something that I didn't even realize until I started thinking about it, like, especially with Batman's gadgets being, like, Link's items. And basically, you'll get something through the story, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can go back to these areas, and I can now use this to unlock this. And I think there's, like, a really interesting conversation to be had about that, and even just its structure is quite linear, I would say. Both Asylum and City, which you have completed recently, and the ones I'm more familiar with, do have like a pretty rigid structure, but have like also open areas. One is more open than the other, though. Like Arkham City's world is a lot more open and free compared to Asylum, but I know you were talking about how you kind of preferred the structure of Asylum. It felt a little more tight-knit, a little more focused. I'd like to hear you kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and this isn't like as a rule, right? Like, I think like in general, I prefer open world games, right? That let you, let loose on a whole city. And I think I wanted to really love that about Arkham City. I love both of those games. I loved Asylum and City. Just to be clear, I feel like I'm talking about Tears of the Kingdom again. It's like I love the game, but I have critiques. It's that all over again. I really loved Arkham City, and I just beat that last night, as of talking about it. But there's things that Asylum is just so much tighter. And there's a lot of things that it shares in common. And once you get inside a building in City, like I think about like the is it the Iceberg Lounge building? What is that? Is that the museum? It's like that feels a lot like a building from Arkham Asylum once you get inside. But the overworld is designed so completely differently. And I really feel like City, it has this whole overworld, but there's no incentive to explore it. And just thinking about Zelda overworlds, like whenever they have a big overworld, it's because it wants you to explore it. But Arkham City isn't really a game about exploration, but it still has this giant overworld, so it just kind of feels like there's space, and there's not nothing to do. But I guess, it's just not really incentivized that you take advantage of the space that's there.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because I think Arkham Asylum, the thing about that structure is like, I guess you can technically say it's open world. I think there's like a kind of muddy line, but to me it's very much like kind of a hub world, not unlike Mario 64, for instance, where you've basically got all these levels where most of the content is located, and you kind of go around and you can say, oh, I can go, here to the intensive care unit, and here to the gardens, and here's the Batcave. And City is more of just an open area that is sort of also a hub world, but it is much larger scale, and I think the main thing that's filling out the space in between these story mission sections, these interiors, are, it's the riddles, the riddle trophies, and then there's some side content, obviously. Like there's phone calls from Zaz, and there's investigating, the Deadshot, case and all that. And I do enjoy the content. I don't want to say that as pretty clearly, but also just kind of because the city is still pretty narrative focused, and the story is mostly just told through that main quest. It's side content that I think you can kind of easily skip or even miss, right? And that is a big difference. And I think it just, like I said, I think it just leads to this kind of interesting discussion about like linearity versus non-linearity. Because I would love a more non-linear Batman game where I feel more encouraged to just explore and do side content. I want to see the entire Gotham City. I want the game to take place more than over the course of like one night. Because that's another narrative aspect of those games, where it's like, this is all supposed to be happening in one night. So there's, some ludonarrative dissonance where it's like, well, first off, I feel like I can't do this all in one night. And also, I feel a little silly focusing on this side content when, like, the Jonker has, poisoned the entire Gotham hospital ward. But they're solid games. And I guess I want to end off my little rant by just saying I think they were pretty important for gaming as a whole in a lot of ways, and that sort of style of like beat 'em up stealth was repeated in other games. Like the one I think of is the Shadow of Mordor games. Took so much from Batman Arkham, and it's both its stealth and it's just hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like Batman Arkham Asylum, like, in some ways, to me, it feels like the first modern game, because when I went back and played it, I'm like, it still feels like it could have come out this year. And there's stuff that obviously the series, its own series, has iterated on it since, and, perfected different things. And, like, I think City has even more complex and more interesting combat scenarios, and there's better items. And, like, in its small adjustments, but it's enough that, like, that was iterated well. But, like, Asylum still feels like a new game to me. Like, it still all works, and I think that was a masterpiece. Like, I have only good things to say about Asylum. But City is just, like, just because it introduces this open world, but to me, it doesn't fully execute. What's interesting about it, to me, like, that left stuff to be desired. And like you said, it's like, it would have been great to have a more, like, you have a freer world, why isn't the story freer? So it's like it kind of feels like the format of Asylum was mapped onto a gameplay style that didn't really fit the prompt anymore. And that's something that I think is fixed in games like the like different Spider-Man games that have come out. I even think about older Spider-Man games that I grew up with, like Spider-Man 2 for like the GameCube and PS2, and Ultimate Spider-Man from that generation as well, which are both very open. They have open cities, open world cities that you can explore at your own pace, different missions that you can choose to accomplish. But there's also kind of downtime, and you're encouraged to swing around the city. It's fun just to swing around the city, and I don't think Arkham City has that same relationship to the overworld.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think for me it's just I think it's a darn shame because I think those two games are solid. I haven't played Night since it came out, and I always have had like mixed feelings about it. Like, and I want to replay it because I imagine I would look at it potentially more positively. But I think it's such a cool game, and I'm surprised we haven't really gotten another solid Batman game, or even just like a solid, I would argue, like superhero game in general. I mean, maybe you could like, say DC in general. Maybe Marvel had a hit game I didn't hear about, but I think it's good stuff. It's really compelling and it's really fun. And I know people. I think there was a period of time where people got tired of it being used, but I remember when Arkham City came out, like a tagline a lot of reviewers used was like, "This game makes you feel like Batman." And maybe that's cheesy, but I'm like, man, it did. I mean, I felt like Batman. I mean, and part of that is just the atmosphere. I think it's so well designed, that world space, and all three of the games is just masterful. And there's just like, there's the aesthetic, there's the sound, there's the Joe Rogan goons going, "It's the Bat," and the conversations. And I think it's just such a love letter to the Batman series as a whole. Like, regardless of which one, it just feels so... It's just, you can tell it had care, and I guess we can shout out maybe the head writer for those first two games, Paul Dini, and others. I don't want to put everything on his shoulders, but obviously he had a role in the animated series, which people love. So I think that definitely shows in its story.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to say those games are carried by their story. I think in many ways they are, and I think like I prefer the story, for instance, of Asylum. I think that's part of why I prefer Asylum to City, even though City, like game mechanic wise, like I think iterates on it in a lot more interesting ways. I'm interested in getting into Night more because I started it, and there's already things just about like the puzzles where I'm going like, okay, it's asking you to do more interesting things. You have a Batmobile, and there's been a lot of puzzles so far about like, can you get it to the right place so that you can like actually like, how do I put this? Like, it's not platforming, but kind of, I mean, it is in a way. It's like you'll have this like rooftop that you're trying to get to, but you need your car to be able to do something on that rooftop. So you have to like, like change like a bridge, activate, like pull a lever so that you can like manipulate the space effectively so that you can launch your car off a ramp. And it's like the previous two games didn't have anything like that. It's like that's the kind of stuff I wanted from the puzzle solving that makes it more interesting. It's like which is very similar to like Zelda level stuff. Like I think about changing the water level in different dungeons and just different dungeons where you're manipulating space. That was a big thing in the Divine Beasts of Breath of the Wild, right? Manipulating space, and I love puzzles that involve that. So I don't know. I haven't finished Arkham Knight, and I'd never played that game before. I don't know if that's going to be consistent throughout the game, but so far at the beginning of it, I'm like that's not a part of the fantasy of being Batman, but it is a part of like interesting level design to me. But I guess like you were talking about that feeling of like, does the game make you feel like you're Batman? And so much of that is a narrative thing, like does it set, do you have batarangs? Do you have the suit? Do you have like the Batmobile? Different things that are just a part of the narrative of like, can I check the box of like, these are all the key components of what it means to feel like Batman. Even though I guess the first two games didn't have the Batmobile, but it's still, yeah, you got to creep up on enemies, stealth, take them down, hide in the shadows, and that makes you feel like Batman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what really works about those games are its focus. Like, I think each game has tried to be bigger than the last, which I really appreciate. But also, like, I don't find, like, for instance, as much as I wish there was more being done with Arkham City's, like, world space, I don't consider it, like, empty. I still feel like it's pretty fleshed out, especially just like visually, right? Like there's very little area in the game that feels like there's nothing going on. And I think, they probably could have attempted to make it bigger, and they could have said, well, let's make the map, twice as large and make it really feel like a city district. But at the same time, I think that would have sort of, muddied the experience somewhat. And so I just kind of appreciate that focus. And I know, like, a conversation a lot of people have had about, like, Zelda and these last two Zelda games is, like, desire to have it focused or even squished down a bit and say, well, like, I would prefer less shrines with more complex puzzles. And I don't know, I'm just trying to relate it to Zelda because this is a Zelda podcast. And I guess for any fans who are confused, Batman is like Link, and the Joker is like Ganondorf, and Commissioner Gordon is like Princess Zelda. So that's, for the fan. I don't know. I feel like Joe makes me think sometimes that the only people who watch this are people who have only played Legend of Zelda, and I'm like, I don't think that's true. I respect y'all more. It's not a competition. I'm so sorry, Joe. But yeah, shout out to, I guess, Batman and superhero games. It seems like a slam dunk, but I think it's kind of rare that we get a really solid one. Because I know as a youth, we had like the Marvel versus Capcom games. Those were fighting games. And then we had the, was it Marvel... Those like Marvel Ultimate Alliance games where you played as like a squad of 4.
I think so. I never played those.
Yeah, I just googled it. It is Ultimate Alliance. Those were ones that were, I remember being pretty fun. And I don't know. I'm just surprised with how big superhero movies are from either DC or Marvel. That there hasn't been like an effort to make. I mean, I guess the truth is, folks, is there actually has been an effort, right? Like I know DC did Suicide Squad recently and Gotham Knights, and I haven't played either of those, but
we just got Spider-Man 2 last year.
Yeah,
right?
we did. That's a good point. We've had 3 PlayStation Spider-Man games: Spider-Man 1, 2, and Miles Morales. Not in that order. But I don't have a PlayStation, so if anyone wants to send us a PlayStation, if anyone wants to send us both a PlayStation 5.
We will review your games, please. We want to play the exclusives. We just, we haven't had access to them. Please send them our way.
No.
I totally agree, though. Like, superhero movies are such a big thing in the zeitgeist. And I think about just different huge movie franchises that I'm like, man, like, they could really be making a buck off of this. And I get that licensed games, like, it's tough to make that work. But, like, I grew up with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man games, and I loved those, the video games based on those Sam Raimi movies. They're such great movies, and the games really paved the way for modern superhero games as well. And with each entry, they did something different that I feel like really helped usher in the kind of modern age of superhero gaming. Even ushering in the Arkham trilogy in different ways. I feel like there's a lineage there. I love the Batman Begins game as a kid too. That was came out on the PS2, GameCube era generation. And that feels like the father of the Arkham games as well. I could do a whole video essay comparing that game to those, and I'm tempted to. But yeah, I mean, it all started just back in the day, and I don't know, there's a great legacy there. I want it to be continued.
For sure. I mean, I think there's just kind of unlimited potential, right? I think there's 20 different ways to make a Batman game, for instance. And they all could be really engaging and interesting. And same with really just any superhero. And so I hope it's something that we just see more of. And I know that for instance, Warner Brothers, I think, only has so many game developers, right? And they're not all making superhero stuff. I know they have Monolith Studios who make the Shadow of War games, which are inspired by the Batman Arkham games and its gameplay in a lot of ways. But obviously, they're probably working on another Lord of the Rings thing, I would assume. And obviously, Suicide Squad was in kind of a development hell kind of situation for almost 9 years, I think. So I do hope that we are coming up on a horizon where you've had these things release and we can hopefully start to see more. I've heard rumors of a Wonder Woman game. I don't know if that's I might have made that up actually, but that'd be cool. I'm kind of curious, Joe, I want to know your thoughts actually about, a lot of people have kind of been arguing for years about a Superman game and saying, that you can't make an interesting Superman game. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think any interesting story can be an interesting game. I mean, I think there are difficulties with Superman, of course, as a character that make him both hard to write for and hard to develop a game for. I'm thinking about just my experience with different Superman games, and it doesn't look great. But I don't know. Like, I think there's potential there, and I think he has a great move set. Like, I think flying, for instance, right? Like, flying you can make interesting, but you can also make it lame. And I've played different games like what was it, the DC Universe Online game? Did you ever play that?
I do remember
My memory
that, yeah.
of that was that like flying was just kind of very like kind of stilted and not super exciting. But I think about flying in other games, whether it's like or things that are similar to flying, right? Whether it's you're using your paraglider in Breath of the Wild or gliding in Arkham City. I think Arkham City has like there's issues I have with his gliding that we've talked about, but like it's not hard to get back in the air and to have that like up and down motion, and I think that's the key. You can't just fly in a straight line. There has to be a challenge of like maintaining your height and figuring out how to either ride wind currents or platform off of things in order to get that height. You have to make it interesting in some way or have stamina, like something to make it interesting. I even like Mario 64's flying. As hard as that is and as archaic as the flying seems sometimes, it's like you lose height. You're always like drifting downwards. So you have to be smart about where you go and how you dive back upwards. And like, it's not necessarily an easy task to make flying interesting, but it's something you can do, and it's been done, fairly well before. And I think that's true with a lot of Superman's abilities. He's so powerful, you just have to create challenges for him. And maybe just like invent a story reason, have there just like be like, oh no, there's like a kryptonite meteor fell to Metropolis, so like there's kryptonite all over the city. Like you can make up a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to me, what I would think is to have him face, really tough individuals. Like, maybe he is fighting like Darkseid's invasion or something, or like you said, like maybe. Lex Luthor's got a giant robot and it's got kryptonite inside of it. I think there's ways to do that and still make Superman feel very powerful. I'm glad you mentioned flying, because I almost think of, this is sort of old and more on rails, but I think about like Star Fox 64 and the set pieces that had, where you're this little fighter and you've got all this stuff kind of going around, and you got stuff crashing in and coming from the side, and you're having to dodge, asteroids and stuff. And I think that would be a fun idea for a Superman flying game, is put him in a situation where he is like, maybe he is on the planet Apocalypse, and there's all these spires of industry and like flying enemies coming at you, and maybe that would feel more like on rails and would be interesting. But I think there's definitely a way to do it. I think it's not impossible, and I would like it to be done because I like Superman, and there's a new Superman movie on the horizon, folks. So now is the time, now more than ever, I think.
I pray, yeah. I'm really interested to see where that movie goes, and I don't know. I'm rooting for it. I like DC characters. We don't get a lot of great movies unless they're Batman movies or Batman related, and even then, it's a risk, right? With like I guess like Birds of Prey and Suicide Squad are like tangentially related to Batman, but like the Batman was great. Joker was great. And it's not just because they're dark and serious, guys. We're willing to like funny movies here. Come on.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted in the comments. Come on, Be mature.
I enjoyed the most recent Suicide Squad movie, I'll say. I thought it was a fun balance of being very silly and fun, but also having its like serious and somber moments. And though I think it could have at times been maybe a bit more serious, and like I would have liked it to linger on certain things more, but I think it was pretty solid. And I don't know, maybe it's just because the first Suicide Squad movie was what it was that I'm like, oh, a Suicide Squad movie with good editing. It feels like it's been years. But DC is something
it's a lot better than the first one.
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about its direction. I mean, we will see. It's really not DC as much as it is their parent company, Warner Brothers, that I worry about. Because I'm because of just every, it seems like every couple months they've just like, they've written off another movie for tax reasons that was like 99% complete. And so as a consumer, I just can't get too excited because it could be something that could be a slam dunk. And I'm like, I don't know, what if they cancel Matt Reeves' Batman sequel? Like, that doesn't seem likely because that's a big moneymaker, but it's also Warner Brothers, so I don't know.
Yeah, there's just no way of knowing. And I mean, I'm rooting for DC. I mean, I want, just like speaking of games, just like I want more games with those characters because there's so many interesting powers and like Green Lantern's interesting and you could do a lot of space locations and get more abstract with that. I think about even if you like what Tears of the Kingdom did, like this would take a smart developer, but like what it did with like Fuse and Ultra Hand, that feels like a perfect like um intro to like Green Lantern's powers. Like if a developer wanted to try to replicate some of those systems, you could have something really interesting there. Um, but I don't know, like it's tough, and there's different superheroes that are just fundamentally really tough to design for because their powers are either too abstract, like Plastic Man. It'd be hard to make a Plastic Man game. I think you could do it, but it'd be tough. Um, but even Marvel, like I want more Marvel games. I'm glad Spider-Man's been getting some love, and I think there are rumors of I don't know if it was announced, but like a Wolverine game in the works or something.
Yeah, there's a
I don't know if
Wolverine
that's
game.
a rumor.
Yeah, because I think that's been confirmed, and I think that'll
Okay.
be like that's a good. I mean, that's something that makes sense to me. That's a good character to roll with, and I think just like an X-Men game in general would be pretty cool. But yeah, like you said, some characters are so kind of esoteric and out there that it's like hard to wrap mechanics around them. I do like what you said about
Mm.
like Ultra Hand because I can imagine in a hypothetical Green Lantern game, there's like a menu where you can basically create projectiles or Green Lantern attacks. So you can say, oh, I'm going to take the fist item and scale it up and add rockets and spikes to it, and then I can map it to this button. So when I do this ranged attack, it's this fist I created that can get thrown out. I think there's something there, like modular game design, or or just with that being a more modular system is actually really interesting. So there's stuff to do, and I think with the power of machines these days, there's a lot you can do, right? Like now more than ever, you can have more character models on screen. So like if you were doing a Superman game and you wanted to, have him fight like more normalish dudes, like you can have hundreds of them now, and you can have him just do a punch that knocks out like dozens of them in one hit. Like there's ways to kind of, with the scale, I think have it make sense and make it feel just not. It doesn't take you out of it, I guess. There's a way to do it, and I believe in in game developers, more or less.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to ask directly. I guess just like maybe not even character centric, but just like I guess like we've had an episode before on the ideal ocean game. Like if you got to be in the room with people making your ideal superhero game, what are you looking for? What are aspects of it just like that you can quantify and say like this is what a good superhero game would look like, or one option for a great superhero game?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I'll ask that question to you once I'm finished. But to me, as silly as it sounds, because we've already gotten a bunch of them, I would actually like another go at a Batman game. And to me, that Batman game sort of resembles I'd want it to be open world. I'd want it to, you're playing as Batman, but I'd love to have a sense of progression like you do in the Arkham games, but maybe one where it feels like you're kind of training Batman and you're increasing his stamina and attack. You're getting new gear. Maybe you're upgrading your Batmobile and your suit. Just something that, is tied to the exploration itself, where maybe you do this side mission with Penguin's gang and that unlocks the, freeze grenade like it does in City, I believe. And I'd also like it to just be a bit more slower paced. I do love the kind of huge scale of the Arkham games where there's a pretty big threat, right? It's like Arkham is completely being run by the inmates, or, Hugo Strange is committing more crimes against the Gotham citizens. Obviously, Night, you've got Scarecrow basically causing the whole city to evacuate. Like, those are fun set pieces, don't get me wrong, but I kind of just want to play a game that makes me feel like kind of more of just like a street hero, kind of average day in the life of a hero. And you can have these big moments, right? Like I would love to have big, long quest lines involving Batman's top dogs, his ultra rogue gallery members like Two-Face and Penguin and Scarecrow and Joker. But I think it's something I'd love to see take place over a period of time, and I'd also like to have Bruce Wayne missions, right? I'd love to maybe to progress the world and unlock new things. You have to do a Bruce Wayne mission, and maybe that's something where you can do some choice and consequence. Maybe as Bruce Wayne, you can, I don't know, make an investment in the city, and that'll change the world space, or you know, maybe you're talking to Harvey Dent. And I think about those Telltale Batman games, which kind of played around with the idea of interacting with those characters differently and kind of teased the idea of saying, well, like, does Batman have to be enemies with the Joker? Can he save Harvey Dent from his fate? Like, I'd actually would really like that. So I guess really what I really want is, like, a Batman RPG. I know, not surprising. I love RPGs, but that's what I want. And I think the key things are feeling kind of like I'm attached to the location and encouraged to explore it, and that's tied to progression. And also just having choice, not only in how I play, right, if I want to be stealthy or kind of in your face, but also with story, maybe determining what kind of Batman I want to be. Because that's another thing the Telltale games played around with, where you kind of, I think, get the option, I think it's at the end of the first chapter, where you've got one of, like, the Maroni or Falcone goons. You can either, like, impale him on a spike or, like, just hang him upside down for the police to get. I think that's all very interesting. So yeah, that's really what I want. I think getting into that role-playing and kind of asking, what kind of hero do you want to be? Or do you want to be more of an anti-hero? That's the advice I'd give to a potential game developer. If I was a billionaire and I had $44 billion, I'd probably want to make video games instead of buying social media platforms. But I'd love to hear what you want, Joe. Please give me your spiel.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with with a couple of those things there. I really love the idea of a day in the life kind of superhero game. That's what I love about the old Spider-Man games, and you could just kind of swing around and just kind of like stop crimes as you find them. So just like the fantasy of being a crime fighter, like you just get to live out that experience, and like narratively, like the game design complements the narrative of the story. I think traversal is really important for superheroes. I think a lot of great superheroes are known, and like they're when you see them posed on comic book covers, it's traversing. Superman is flying, Batman is grappling, Spider-Man is web swinging. These are all like very important aspects of the superhero fantasy. It's just how they move, and just like moving in a fun way, a dramatic way, where you can imagine yourself flying through a city, or grappling, or using your Batmobile, or web swinging. Those are all very important, I think, for the character. So I guess like with that in mind, it's like I would want it to be like more of like a 3D platformer in that sense, like with importance given to traversal and making it interesting. And there's games that do that, like I love those old Spider-Man games that like Spider-Man 2, based on the Tobey Maguire movie, like just like how that innovated web swinging. I really recommend all of Jamie Fristrom's, the developer's talks on web swinging, and he's done a lot of videos on YouTube where you can hear him talk about like the development of it, comparing it to the new games, and just kind of and him talking and comparing it to his new game, relatively new Energy Hook, and just talking about like the mechanics of movement, and I really think that is core to the narrative of those games. So I guess like for a superhero game, like I'd want to make sure they're really nailing that right, because that's something that I love the Arkham games, but I do feel like it's so easy to just glide around a city and climb up a building sometimes. And it's like, well, I want that to be a challenge. I want to be rewarded for learning how to parkour and get that right, and make sure I'm timing my jumps or managing stamina, whatever it is. It's like I want it to be a test that like I can pass, like navigating the city, and I guess like that's what I want. Like that's an important thing for me.
For sure, yeah. Movement, I think, is really key. It's always nice to I mean, it feels good to move in video games, or when it does, I should say. It can make the experience really enjoyable. Like, I love the free climbing of Zelda. I think that's like really important. And I know other games have kind of either on purpose or not replicated that. Like, I think the most recent Assassin's Creed games have freeform climbing, where you can kind of scale not only like any building, but also mountainsides and cliffs, and it makes it so that it's like, oh. It's just a lot easier to get around, and it feels very involved, you know. And I know other games have like fun climbing, like the more recent God of War games. You can't climb anywhere, but there's a lot of climbing to be done, and it's enjoyable. So movement, I think, feeling good is just always awesome, and it is kind of integral, because obviously if I'm like doing the most basic thing and I'm getting kind of bored or frustrated, that's a problem. And I think that's something to figure out if you do a superhero game, especially because so many of them do fly or move around at a fast speed. Like if you did a Flash game, I think you could do a Flash game, but you also want that movement to feel good. You want to feel fast, and maybe you're cheesing that in some ways. Like maybe you're adding like a fisheye lens around him when he runs, and you're adding like little streaks of air behind him so it looks faster than it is. But there's a lot of ways to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm. I think you can ramp up speed as well. I think it would be tough, and you'd really want the level design to promote that. I think about the Sonic games, right, where it's like you're encouraged to go fast, and the level design, of course, has been adjusted so that when you go fast, you can see decisions that you make ahead of you, and encourages you to make quick decisions. I'm not super into Sonic, but like what I've seen of it, I think gets that right. And I think it would be really interesting to see like a cityscape, like Central City. I think that's the Flash's city, like designed around that idea of going fast. But I mean, it's not easy stuff. Like these are all like, it's novel, and it would be unique for the character. And so it's something that like, to me, like introducing like you were talking about, like stamina based climbing, like there is in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I think that would really help like some of the like add challenge to like the climbing that's like in a Batman game. Like I was playing City and it just felt too easy to get around. I wanted a little more challenge. I think stamina would have helped. I think you could do that with Spider-Man. Maybe he just does so much climbing that maybe that wouldn't work. I don't know. It doesn't work for everyone, and I guess that's the point. Is that like it's so character specific, so it would be hard to develop. But I don't know. It's I think that'd be a really cool challenge, and I hope to see some new characters attempted.
For sure, and I think that's a good point. Yeah, like in many ways, what I feel like I'm kind of asking for is build a new system from the ground up, and I think that's kind of why I suggested, like in a Flash, you can almost kind of cheat the feeling, in some ways. Like but I understand it is hard, and I guess in my ideal situation, like I'd want to give a developer a lot of time to just getting that core mechanic down. For sure. I mean, I think about Tears of the Kingdom, like, they spent so much time on that fuse system and on Ultra Hand because they wanted it to work, really, flawlessly. They didn't want you to, put something together and it didn't work because the game system is broken. So, I mean, and that's a pretty big dedication of, like, time and money and detail to make that work, but I think it is worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not easy. I have a lot of respect for these developers that, especially, are coming up with new systems. Because I think that's the thing is like I've thought about this with Wind Waker Unflooded for this project on this channel. Like putting together a map is a huge challenge. Obviously, like it's gonna take a long time, but it's something that I think is relatively. It's like I can get into that, and I'm relatively a beginner when it comes to this 3D stuff. Right? Like I think putting together an environment, being creative, like obviously that takes skill and it takes thought, intentionality, like you have to think about it as a creative, as a creator, as a writer, the story that you're telling with the environment, that all matters. But it's more accessible, just the idea of creating a map. What's something that's completely daunting to me is like I wouldn't know where to start with like creating like a movable character with an interesting controller. Like that's something that I think is like a higher art. So it's like I really respect all these developers that are putting in the time to create these unique systems. And I think I don't know, like there's so many times I play a game and I'm like, I don't know how you would do this better. And then I play the sequel and I'm like, they did it. That's how I felt going from Asylum to City. It's like the combat was just a little bit more fluid. And there were more things that you could do. And I'm like, I didn't even realize I have the same amount of buttons. I don't know how I can do more. So I don't know. I shout out to game developers. I'd love to have more game developers on the podcast. If there's anyone there, this is an open invitation. Reach out to me. I'll have you on the show.
Yeah, I have questions. I always really love when developers are allowed to, like, peel back the curtain and talk about how a system works. I love when games that are leading up to a release have developer diaries, and I do love when, maybe they'll upload a video somewhere about, the lead designer or whoever designer, talking about how they made the system or how it works. I always find that just really interesting. And I know, like, Tim Kaine, I believe, is a developer who, made the first 2 Fallouts, and he made a bunch of other RPGs and stuff, too. He worked on the Vampire Masquerade game, and he does videos now on YouTube where he just talks about his philosophy around designing games, and he talks about his experience in it. And I find it awesome. Like, I love seeing how the sausage is made. It gives me a deeper appreciation for these things.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I love Mark Brown's channel as well, the Game Maker's Toolkit, and his Boss Keys episode. For Zelda fans, if y'all haven't watched Boss Keys yet, I really recommend that series. And he's a game developer, and he's unpacking just the dungeon design of different Zelda games and how dungeons are designed differently in different games. We have this idea of what a traditional Zelda dungeon is, but but dungeons look differently in each game. They have different conventions, even going to game. So it's that series is a great dive, just to kind of understanding what makes them tick, and like the fact that they are different in each entry. So I recommend that. Alex, we're wrapping up on the video. We're running out of time.
Yeah, it was a lot longer. I hope everyone enjoyed. And Joe, do you have any closing thoughts or statements?
I just want to ask everyone to like and subscribe and comment down below if you have any questions or topic ideas that you want us to tackle on the next episode.
Yeah, awesome. Likewise. And thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for liking, and for just, taking part in this. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to Joe as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, as we say here on the show, peace and love from us to y'all.
From us to y'all. Did you say it with me?
I said it. I thought you were saying it with me, dude.
Yeah, I was saying it with you. Were you saying it with me?
Yeah, I was saying it with you, man. We were so in sync that we didn't realize we were in sync, I think.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. All right.
We'll add it in post.